So hi, everybody. Welcome to our conference, part of H4X Labs. We really want to grow the community. Deep tech is such an important domain. We talked a little bit about that, I guess the definition where I'll just quote Swati, where she calls deep tech essentially these companies that establish businesses founded on breakthrough science and engineering, which is critical because it's really these breakthrough discoveries and inventions that will solve some of the world's hardest problems. And Steve Blank himself has scaled several of these types of companies. And he's been following essentially how do you build these companies from concept into something that actually drives a lot of impact as well as being profitable. And so I feel it's so important to have him talk through his discovery and his learnings over the last several decades, actually, because he has so much experience. But let me first just paraphrase here. So Steve's been on the Defense Business Board. He's also works within the national security arena, where he teaches a class at Stanford, Hacking for Defense, which Pete mentioned. He was the founder of NSF's I-Corps, which is core to helping inventors realize the inventions and the discoveries that they have. But with that, I wouldn't do Steve justice. So Steve, how about you introduce yourself and your background and why this arena and your work, and what inspires you, what motivates you to do the work that you do?
Thanks, Ellen, and thanks for having me. The problem is that at my age, the background sometimes is longer than the conversation, so I'll try to make it short. Spent 4 years in the U.S. Air Force during Vietnam, electronic warfare, electronic intelligence. Joined Silicon Valley a long time ago, but the interesting part that relevant here is my first company was kind of a halfway house between my military career and my entrepreneurial career. It was run by a PhD mathematician named Bill Perry, who eventually became Secretary of Defense. And by accident, I was in the middle of national means of technical verification. But ended up doing, after that, 8 startups in Silicon Valley, box score at the end of that, 4 IPOs, and 2 craters so deep they have their own iridium layer. But out of that, I did some 2 semiconductor companies, which were kind of deep tech. They were startups from the ground up. A supercomputer company who's was truly interesting because I got to meet and learn about some pretty deep science and tech applications, and then everything else from enterprise software to video games. And as some of you know, when I retired, I started thinking about the nature of innovation and entrepreneurship and realized we had no methodology. That is, we had no process as entrepreneurs and founders. And my work, Eric Ries's work, and Alexander Osterwalder's work ended up creating what's now known as the lean startup methodology, about using business models or mission models, customer development, and agile engineering to build startups as a repeatable process. And as you mentioned, I now teach at Stanford. I created the Lean Launchpad class, but became the National Science Foundation and Innovation Core. Relevant here, it also became the NSA's I-Corps. And not only with Pete and Joe Filter started Hacking for Defense, but also with Joe created a new class at Stanford called Technology, Innovation, and Modern War. The implications, and which is relevant in this conversation, about all the technologies that the DoD doesn't own that's going to affect our ability to keep the peace and prosecute the next war. So that's my background. And obviously very interested in the intersection of innovation, technology, and defense, because for better or worse, we've come full cycle. We're now Silicon Valley, and the innovations that it's driving is going to drive the success or failure of the Department of Defense in the next foreseeable future.
Yeah, thank you for that. Looking across these years, you've worked with so many companies, and you have a lot of data, or at least a lot of pattern recognition. What are 1 or 2 trends or principles that you see in founders and how they actually access, bring their ideas to market? What should they be doing?
One is the personal characteristics, Ellen, we could talk about those. And the other is the ecosystem that supports them, which has radically changed. The former is still the same. For me, being involved in startups, mostly in deep science and tech, it was always, I still have an insatiable curiosity to learn new things. From learning about computational fluid dynamics and computational chemistry to enterprise software to semiconductors to I could still tell you the SS18 downlink frequencies, though they'd probably shoot me if I could.
Wow.
So that curiosity kind of drove my interest in different types of startups because they were deep and interesting. But the second one is if you're a founder, and again, founders need different characteristics than early employees. If you're a founder, there's a couple of things. One is you need to be relentless. And that's right on the edge, or maybe even over the edge of being incredibly annoying. You need to show up a lot. And you need to show up with a second characteristic with passion and energy. Because, you could tilt the playing field if you show up more than anybody else. And I did that a lot, and it turned out it paid off a lot. And then, the one of the cores of lean, which is also a personal characteristic, is you need to be agile. That is, you need to have your eye on the prize, but you need to be listening to the data as it's coming in from customers in the marketplace that maybe you need to move in this direction or somewhere else. As I just said, the prize, you need to have your eye on a prize. Where are you going in 3 years? Not in 20 years, but in 3 years, what's your vision? And so those are kind of, I think, standard characteristics that are true regardless of the decade or age. The things that have changed radically for entrepreneurs is, at least since I was one, is number one, you used to have to be in a innovation cluster to even know what entrepreneurship was. Well, the internet changed everything. Entrepreneurship is now everywhere. Every town, every city, anybody with an internet connection not only can know about entrepreneurship, but Amazon Web Services and the rest have changed your ability to get resources, at least computing resources, by a factor of 1 million. It's now like electricity. You pay your money and you plug in and there's compute. But the other one is, and it's also changing for dual use companies, is that capital used to be, that is, the amount of money available used to be limited to, again, these innovation clusters. And now capital is more widely distributed, particularly after the pandemic. And so I see these things have changed. And probably for companies wanting to focus on the DoD as a market, for a long time, venture capitalists kind of ran away from DoD-focused startups. And nowadays, especially with the rise of the Defense Investors Network, there's close to 100 that meet every month, thinking about how to put money and find deals that invest in both selling to the DoD and to the commercial world.
I do want to pull on something. You mentioned essentially, if we step back and look at the I'll define deep tech domains where we'll have material science startups or some of the biotech startups, chip startups, maybe even artificial intelligence, and all these, there's different groupings within this broader deep tech domain. And these founders are looking to kind of get funding. And you mentioned the funding aspect has actually diversified. Certainly there are now a set of investors that look at defense-oriented startups, which they never have before. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What has changed, and how does one actually maybe appeal better or position to these investors? What are they looking for from your perspective?
It's very funny. Certainly Silicon Valley, I use that as an analog for a lot of innovation clusters, has gone full circle. Silicon Valley started in the 50s, as Microwave Valley, selling to the defense industry. And for your audience, if you don't know the history of how the DoD started Silicon Valley, there's a video called "The Secret History of Silicon Valley," which will be a little bit of a mind blower in terms of history. But of course, in this century, venture capitalists went to wherever the greatest returns were, which were social media companies and the rest, and kind of ran away for a while from hardware and deep tech because the returns, that is how much money they made, it wasn't a great investment. And now what's happening is, the DoD is getting a little smarter. The adaptive acquisition framework at least allowed people to kind of describe without using, something on the whiteboard for 5 hours, a rational process, even though the requirements and budgeting process is still a little insane. Also, folks in the DoD are starting to acknowledge that, while the primes are still going to be around building carriers and boomers, they're more than likely not the ones to provide the next generation of technology that the DoD needs. But most importantly, and I'm going to keep coming back to this ad infinitum, is that the technologies that the DoD needs to keep the peace and win the next war are no longer owned by the primes or the federal research labs or anything in the DoD's purview. That is AI, machine learning, autonomy, commercial access to space, biotech, quantum, etc. Most of these are being driven by commercial companies. Big idea. That's never happened in the history of what we call the Department of Defense. Never. And yet our entire requirements, budgeting, and acquisition system are built on cycles that says, no, we own all the technology. And by the way, the cycle time of going from a requirement to actually putting something in the field, 5 years, that's more than fine. Well, if you're an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, you have startups in that time, and your technology has gone through multiple cycles, and you're releasing multiple times a day, not per hour. The DoD is just not built to deal with acquiring, let alone writing requirements or budgeting in that cycle. So there's a huge impedance match. And here's the kicker: is the DoD is operating like General Motors, but China's operating like Silicon Valley. I mean, if you look at in fact, China's actually operating like the Department of Defense did in the 1950s, when we generated 5 generations of fighters and 2 classes of aircraft carriers and fielded, boomers for the first time, 3 generations of manned bombers, B-36, 47, and 52, and it all ended when Robert McNamara came in and tried to provide some order out of the chaos by focusing on .MLPF, that is 30-year life cycle and cost constraints, etc. By the way, none of which ever worked, but at least gave a fig leaf to that's what we needed to do. And I don't think the light bulb has gone on yet to everyone that no, we need to shoot that in its head, because that's no longer the world that we live in anymore. Our adversaries are operating at different speeds with different methodologies. And if we believe China is our competitor, by the time we get our act together, Taiwan might be flying a different flag. Besides the implications about freedom of its people, it controls 90 some odd % of the advanced semiconductor supply for the United States with a company called TSMC. And so besides the human rights consideration, there's a strategic consideration that hopefully is having policymakers like not only lose sleep but wet their beds. I
think that's really interesting you say that, because I feel like the COVID pandemic, where our supply chain started to bifurcate, certainly we did a lot of business with China, but I think the supply chains are diversifying, and even now the semiconductor aspect, where we have a shortage that's impacting the broader American population, that actually has started to help us on more broadly, besides folks in the DoD, more just America in general, more broadly understand that, these supply chains are challenged, can be, actually China has a lot of control over what we can access. And I feel as we have this conversation, where I'm going to start moving our conversation a little bit to the Innovation and Competition Act, where Biden's administration is looking to invest upwards of $100 billion over the next 5 years into basic research, applied research, where I think a lot of this community here will benefit. And I'm curious your perception of that act. And, because you worked with NSF and came up with and helped them develop I-Corps, how do you see that act? And how does it pertain to what you do, as well as how does it improve our national competitiveness?
Yeah, just, for some of your viewers, Innovation Competition Act, let's see, I think it was about $250 billion act that foster scientific innovation. And essentially it was the Compete with China Act. And it had a bunch of components, they broke them up into what were called divisions, A through G. One was the CHIPS Act, which included also appropriations for 5G technology. And part of this was the Endless Frontier Act, which basically stood up a directorate for technology and innovation within the National Science Foundation, engineering, biology, R&D lab, and research into security for the National Science Foundation. The sounds like a ton of money. It's actually 50 billion over 5 years. They're not writing a $250 billion check. And the other part is it made great press, but of course that was the Senate's version, and now it goes to the House. So in the Senate, it had to become a bipartisan version to get Republicans interested, but the House is dominated by Democrats. And as everybody knows, our process goes, then the House gets to mark it up. And then they have to have reconciliation of like agreeing on what the House and Senate changes are. So we're not sure what the sausage will look like when it gets out on the other end. And so the answer is it's good news. It's a ton of money for lots of stuff. And if you read the fine print in any bill from Congress, there's a ton of pork for everybody's favorite, vendor or contributor or whatever. But it's still good for the country. Unfortunately, they're still not thinking like entrepreneurs, but it's better than not having one. Giving money to the semiconductor industry, but not taking any equity in exchange for any of the upside. Well, that seems to be the way Congress, gives out money. But yeah, giving the National Science Foundation a new directorate for essentially applied technology, great idea. Lots of money for STEM, science, technology, and math education, great idea. I think it's good for the country. I think we're going to be surprised about the unexpected consequences. Hopefully, hopefully positive. There were things in it about Taiwan that were nice, but I don't know. For me, it would be pretty simple to just have the act say no more defense equipment to Taiwan until they started moving, their next generation fabs to the United States or Europe. That is, just to put this in scale, the Taiwanese semiconductor company, TSMC, well, this is a $50 billion ad for the US semiconductor business. That one company said they're going to spend $100 billion in the next 5 years building next generation factories for chips in Taiwan. Well, that's twice what we're going to build. Well, why wouldn't we just say, if your survival is important, why aren't you building those fabs in the United States? That didn't come up in any of the bills, and I was just kind of confused why. This is, as I said, for just focusing on that one narrow piece, it's pretty critical. And back to the chip shortage, I just should point out, and Ellen, maybe this is the first group will hear it for the first time. If you just read the news, and I'm just talking about things in open source news, as this wasn't a chip shortage, this was a series of unfortunate accidents in Japan in 4 fabs that all happened to have fires in their basement. What a coincidence, huh? And I don't know how. No, just Google fabs and fab fires in Japan, and you'll go, oh, look at that! It must be fire season. I thought we only had that in California.
You mentioned endless frontier and unintended consequences, and I think within what we're trying to discuss here, where you have a lot of kind of dollars going into basic and applied research, and then trying to realize that research into some sort of concept that then becomes a product that goes into a company. What are the unintended consequences that you are concerned about, and how can we play a role? Like, what do companies need in order to build and scale?
So help me understand some more, Ellen, about the focus of your question.
Yeah, my focus of the question is really kind of deep tech oriented founders, and they're going to probably benefit from some of this R&D and research and funding that's going to come out. And oftentimes they'll hit a gap in terms of the valley of death, and we're trying to talk through how do we actually scale across that.
Yeah, so I spent a good chunk of my later part of my career and some of my early part of the career working with scientists who have some really interesting things, or with the National Science Foundation, which are principal investigators trying to take tech out of their labs. That ditch of death is kind of described as that gap between, the early prototype and commercialization. And one of the things we discovered with the National Science Foundation I-Core, Innovation Core, it's not just a funding thing, it's a people thing. That is the innovators who develop the tech. If you could think about two groups of people inside of maybe three groups inside of a research lab. There are the basic scientists who are happy to spend the rest of their career pushing the frontiers of knowledge, but doing it by publishing papers and expanding the expanding shell of knowledge among their peers. There's a subset of them that are interested in taking that basic knowledge or insight and figuring out how to find some commercial use of that outside the lab or outside some journal. And those are the people, the NSF and I-Core found and said, let's figure out how to build the team around you. And with few exceptions, that scientist is almost never the entrepreneur. That is, there's an innovator, but there's also an entrepreneur. And you build that team around those two people. By the way, the one exception tends to be in life sciences, where there's a higher percentage of people who are innovators who are also pretty good entrepreneurs. They run biotech labs, but they also start companies and sit in scientific advisory boards. But it's in fact the combination of those, at minimum, an innovator and an entrepreneur. And it's the entrepreneur who will run kind of the gamut of, finding product market fit or mission solution fit, finding capital, et cetera, kind of sometimes using the innovator as, no, why don't you set up the scientific advisory board, or you talk to the key customers, et cetera. But that search for a repeatable and scalable business model is very, very rarely done by the innovator themselves. It's done by the entrepreneur in partnership with the innovator. In the commercial world, the equivalent is, in the very old days, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Jobs couldn't write a line of code or build any hardware. It was Wozniak. It was, at Microsoft, it was Gates and Allen. Gates positioned himself in history as the person who wrote some code, but the person who actually did the work was Paul Allen. In modern days, it's, at Tesla, it's Elon Musk and J.B. Straubel. Elon Musk, a company wouldn't exist without his ability to create a reality distortion field and raise, an ungodly amount of money. But he didn't design a drivetrain into Tesla or design the car. It was J.B. Straubel. And again, on SpaceX, it wasn't Elon. It was, Glenn Shotwell ran the company, but I think it was Miller who built the Merlin engine. And so it's usually this combination of a, in the back room, some innovator toiling away and some entrepreneur who creates the magic of building the company, finding the right customers, finding the money, crossing that valley of death. And why it's tougher in the DoD. And by the way, full stop, for any of you founders, listening and watching, you ought to look around at your founding team and go, okay, who's the innovator and who's the entrepreneur? And those skill sets are very different. And it doesn't mean you can't be both, but usually, at least as I said, with the life sciences, somehow the exception, usually you're not great at both. And therefore, that's why you need a complete team. And selling to the DoD is even harder. So there's usually a third person who, if you're good at it, kind of knows the ways of building dual use companies. That is, how do I get not only SIBRs, but what's the path for mid-tier acquisition, so I could skip 3 years of requirements or whatever? What's the path of working the system at the same time I'm building a commercial company that uses the DoD as kind of lighthouse customers for my commercial potential business, and that's maybe a different skill set. So does that make sense? So yes, there's not only this ditch of death, but there's the notion is that the team needs to actually be the right team for the right phase of the company. Certainly in the lab, it's all about the innovator. Certainly finding product market fit, it's the innovator and the entrepreneur. Gee, navigating the DoD, and that's maybe a different skill set and the requirements and getting budget. And by the way, realizing that being on perpetual SIBRs is not a company, it's a hobby. So what you're looking for is scale eventually. And how do I do that? And what's the right skill set for that? Does that help answer?
Yeah, that helps tremendously. I mean, as you frame it, it's all about the people and how we actually bring the diverse team and the skill sets, the relevant skill sets to bear.
Right. And again, let me not diminish the role of obviously the tech and obviously solving a problem that's important for national security and for commercial companies, but that's an art. That's not a spreadsheet. It's a big idea. Building companies is an irrational, against all odds process and requires, way back to my comments, passion, agility, and a relentless drive to make something happen against all odds. Most startups fail, and the ones that win figure out how to agilely kind of understand the tech, find product market fit, dance from ice flow to ice flow, etc. I mentioned 4 of my 8 companies went public, but the other 4, as I said, were failures. No failure feels good, but the good news, at least in the United States and now most parts of the world in innovation clusters, we have a special name for a failed entrepreneur. You know what it is, Ellen?
No, tell us.
Experienced. So again, if you're in an innovation cluster, you get multiple shots at the goal, which means that there's no such thing as a 12-year-old startup. There's a 2-year-old startup to a 10-year-old failure. That's the failure, is being in the land of the living dead and not shutting the damn thing down and doing something again. Again, there's a special type of company, unfortunately, that I found in the DoD or in the DoD ecosystem that kind of lives from SIBR to SIBR, and I consider those like a waste of talented people. If there isn't some traction here, for God's sake, unless you know something no one else knows, there isn't another life after this. So make this one important and pick up and do something again. And
we hope to have impact that way. Just in you talking here, I think that has resonated with several folks. I do have a couple questions coming in, and we have about 15 minutes left. So let me just read out one of the first questions. So the first question is, how might we overcome the policy and cultural friction to true defense acquisition partnerships in the Pacific and with other partners? Five Eyes.
Wow, that's so those were two kind of
like two questions.
Kind of aligned. Five Eyes, Canada, UK, New Zealand, Australia. I'm missing one. What am I missing? But and then in the Indo-Pacific, that's a superset, which includes Japan, Singapore, India, etc. With the Five Eyes, partnerships are kind of a little easier than those outside, but we truly need, if we're going to win in the Indo-Pacific, much tighter partnerships, not only for supply chain, but for also integrating our weapon systems and integrating our operational plans, etc. Inside the DoD and the SecDef's office and the head of R&E, underneath the research and engineering, there's a group called the R&E for modernization, and I think they have a group for kind of this foreign kind of integration. And I would be spending some time with that organization, both understanding where the new people's heads are at, and also educating them about the barriers to do this. One of the things I've been surprised about is when we've had folks from the Pentagon come out, or we've actually managed to go out and visit them is how few of them can actually draw a diagram of how a startup works or how venture capitalists make money. And so almost every time I'm visiting, that side, I kind of challenge them. Here, go up to the whiteboard and tell me how I make money, or how do I invent? And oh, we don't know, but we can tell you how Huntington Ingalls makes money because their lobbyists are here every day. But no, we don't have a clue how so good. Well, if you explain to them, no, we don't have 4 years to wait, and we don't have a staff of 30 just to respond to this broad area announcement or something else. Part of the onus back to startups is you need to not only keep complaining, but you need to start educating. Everybody you meet in the DoD is how our world works. And at the same time, you truly need to understand, how their world works. The surprise is that while we complain about standard acquisition, and God bless Ellen Lord, she did make it at least understandable with the adaptive acquisition framework. There are now shortcuts in almost every service and combatant commands. Almost every one of them now knows how to use OTAs or mid-tier acquisitions to kind of bypass a good chunk of the requirements and acquisition process. It's still long and whatever tedious, but almost every service also has an equivalent to a rapid capabilities group, where at least you could get something much bigger than a SIBR if you kind of hook up to those folks. And by the way, the thing I want to acknowledge, at least in the time since I hooked up with Pete and you guys, Ellen, is that the mindset in the DoD has been rapidly changing. There are now over 100, incubators and accelerators and people using lean or their versions of an innovation pipeline and whatever. And that's great from the bottom up. And from the top, you'll still now hear kind of the mouth move about innovation and how urgent this is. We're still kind of missing the delivery at scale, because if you look at the MDAPs, the major defense acquisition programs, they're all still legacy systems, and there's no budget for the stuff coming this way, and very few of them have become programs of record. But we're getting a lot closer in closing that gap. And if Mike Brown actually does become who's nominated to be head of acquisition, there is somebody who just ran the defense innovation unit who kind of understands maybe potentially how to close that gap. And so there is hope. My problem is, the thing I lose sleep for is that gap between we finally figure out down from incubators how to move at speed with a process that doesn't know how to move in less than 5 years, is that's where China moves, and like it's over in the South China Sea. That's my concern, is that I think we will get our act together. It's just that time is not on our side. I just don't believe we have time for 30-year shipbuilding plans, for example.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We have time for
5 years.
Tell me what we're going to put in the water at scale, not just more, not just more demos. The DoD has more demos than any other organization on the planet. It has the inability and the lack of willpower from the top down to actually deploy stuff at scale that's good enough, that actually changes the calculus of potential adversaries. And if I was SecDef, that would be the thing that I'd be removing senior leadership who are in the way of doing that. We don't have time for 20-year plans now. World War I was fought, at least from the U.S. side, was fought and won in 40 months. I mean, you can't write a requirement in that time. We built 100,000 airplanes in that time. We put 50 aircraft carriers to sea. I mean, we're still pushing paperwork around, one office to another here. We still have not declared this a crisis, because the good news is about the DoD is that in a crisis, when we all agree it's a crisis, we tend to rise to the occasion. In our follies in Iraq and Afghanistan, we managed to work together in a way on the battlefield that eventually we got our act together and fused a lot of organizations that never worked together, back in Washington, but in the battlefield, they did an incredibly competent job when they finally realized that, that's what the fight required. And of course, you go back home and then the bureaucracy collapses all that. Ellen, I'm sorry. What was your question?
Well, I'll go back, because as you talked about moving quickly and at scale, this question is relevant. So the long pole is S&T to engineering and test and transition. The question is, how can we accelerate the safety and capability certifications? And maybe we need to take some risk there. I don't know, but that's the question. How can we accelerate safety and certification?
So I would take whoever asked that question and spank them for a while. One of the biggest problems, and I think this is a problem, and I'm only being facetious to whoever asked that question, is that for the last 60 years, we fell in love with this 30-year life cycle, right? .MLPF, I forget what it's, but the whole, maintenance and training and all this stuff needed to be correct, and we needed, support. All that's true, but if you don't get shit in the water, it really doesn't matter. And so I think we need to have two different mindsets now, and we've not kind of grasped this. And Pete and I have been calling this the innovation doctrine. We need to understand that, of course, we need things that have safety and security and 30-year life cycles and training and whatever, and things that will last forever. But there's a whole different mindset that we need to have that says, no, I want you to build a whole ton of attritable things that are going to last 5 years, who are upgradable overnight, who, the technology will change. They're disposable. I don't care if they break. I want them to, that last enough that if something happens, or maybe it could deter something that happened, because now our assets are not on, these big floating platforms called aircraft carriers with bullseyes painted on their flight deck. That's a different mindset, and it's not one versus the other. That's the point. But we don't have the other right now. We do that as one-offs, or they end up as demos and then never scale. My favorite, we seem to be focused on Indo-Pacific, though. Also, the Kaliningrad corridor is something we should be worried about as well in Eastern Europe, but let's just take Indo-Pacific. There's no reason that 5 years ago we shouldn't have had unmanned refueling tankers and unmanned ISR flying off the decks of carriers. I mean, there's no reason, other than real men fly, F-18s. There's no.
You're looking at the real reason why some things didn't transition.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's like, and if you go up a level, there's no reason. All our assets are in carriers. One doesn't have to be like a genius to look at, narco subs as semi-submersibles or others to figure out that maybe we ought to distribute some of these assets in other places. Because if the goal is to, of a carrier strike group is to project sea power, defend the sea lanes, and protect an amphibious landing, or nowadays, support the Marines EABO concept, then maybe these are not the right configurations. None of those mean we shouldn't build carriers. It should mean is we should be putting the stuff in the water at scale right now, whether they're right or wrong, to kind of confuse our adversaries who basically spent the last 20 years negating every one of our strengths. In fact, if you think about it, what they've done is turn our strengths into legacy systems that are albatrosses. And again, I don't mean to denigrate what we built. They're great and they're whatever, but people have figured out how to use asymmetric, technology and weapons to kind of make them more vulnerable than they've ever been in the history. The South China Sea used to be an American lake. No one in the Navy from top down would declare that now. Yet if you look at what we have in the water now or in the next 3 years, there's no credible alternative.
Yeah, what you bring up is so important. The fact, even just your example about the narco subs. So even not even governments have the ability to asymmetrically achieve their mission, yet we're still not really able to harness that innovation for ourselves, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, the way to think about the new model now, Ellen, is, if you go think about the hierarchy, right? There's new tech, mostly outside the DoD. Then there are new classes of weapon systems. Those will create, whether they're cyber or AI or whatever. There could be new vendors. That is, Huntington and Ingalls are not going to be making, 10,000 semi-submersibles at $1 million each. They don't know how to make a wrench at less than whatever. But those new weapon systems and new vendors will create new operational concepts. That's the big idea, right? The goal is not to play with tech or even create new weapons. It's to actually create new concepts. And again, the Chinese have done that in negating our systems, and now it's our turn. But the other key observation is, and I keep going back to this, is a lot of this key technology is outside the purview of the DoD. But the DoD still owns the exquisite kind of sensors or kinetic effects and whatever. And it's figuring out how to combine this off-the-shelf stuff with the things that we are really good at, both the pointy ends of things and the concepts of how to employ them are the things we ought to figure out how to do better. And that requires reconfiguring, what is it our federal research labs do? How do we employ startups? What is the startup's role in working with the DoD? And that requires a mindset change. Again, it's not just an acquisition problem, it's a mindset change of, oh, this is off the shelf. Well, yeah, but we still own this kind of core technology. Let's figure out how to put it on the, as I said, on the pointing end of something. So sorry about the long answer.
No, that was really helpful. I think we have one time for just one more question, and then we'll be turning over to Hello Tomorrow, which will further talk about, this deep tech ecosystem that they're building. So let me read the question. When working with DoD, the current paradigm is that quality is ensured through data-driven development. In the new innovation paradigm, what is the equivalent? Maybe it's the same. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I don't quite understand the question. I guess in my paradigm, and this is just me, speed and urgency for deployment at scale. When we teach hacking for defense, at least how we teach at Stanford, the goal is not a demo. The goal is teaching students how to get to deployment, and that's if you're a vendor, all you care about is maybe the order. But if you're in the DoD and a policymaker or senior leadership, you should be caring about things in the air or on the ground or whatever, or how to defend. By the way, I've been, Ellen, using a lot of Navy analogs for change. But if anybody wants to, again, see what the future of ground warfare, the Army and Marines look like, just look at those videos of what happened last year in the Armenian Azerbaijani war, the drone war. I'm not sure we could prosecute a war like that, or if we could, or whether we could defend against a war like that. They took out 348 tanks with, Turkish drones, with maybe Israeli EW, but that combination of a war prosecuted looked like science fiction. Yes, I worry about digital, clones and building things, but boy, there was, good enough technology employed like it was science fiction. And it ought to have been sobering to.
It goes everybody. To your point about new ConOps, good enough and new ConOps.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's not the mindset we have, top to bottom. And in this case, it might take Congress to smack someone on the side of the head that said, thank you for giving me a ton of 30-year shipbuilding plans or, B-2 bombers, but what are you putting in the water, in the air, and on the ground in the next 3 to 5 years? That's a very different conversation. And by the way, I keep hammering on that because we know how to do that in Silicon Valley. We know how to move with speed and urgency. All your founders who are watching this know how to do that. And yet we've yet to harness the Silicon Valley tools, technology, culture, to understand that this is not a nice to have or some great place to visit on our technology tour while we go around, to the West Coast in the winter because the weather is better. We really need to kind of process a bit is how do we make this happen here? I'm both hopeful now that we're kind of getting it and still frustrated that we've been talking about this for forever, for a while. And at least from my point of view, and where Pete and I sit and all BMNT sit, it's pretty obvious how you do this. And it's frustrating that it's not obvious from inside the DoD. That's our impedance mismatch. we're getting closer, but I hope we have the time to do that. So I really appreciate this conversation, Ellen. It was fun.
Yeah, it was super fun. Yeah, thank you so very much for spending your time with us.
Right.
We're at our time, but definitely let's get back together and we'll continue the conversation.